Well, everyone, we'll get underway. I'm sure once everyone's finished their ice creams, they will come flocking in a few minutes' time. My name's Simon Fruscia. I'm the Director of Operations for TalkPoint. So we are a webcasting company in the enterprise space, managed and self-service. But I'm not going to go on about me. I'm going to talk about my panel today. So what we're going to be talking about is really what we're seeing in trends in terms of people utilising traditional platforms from 323 video conference units, webcams, into Link, Jabber, etc., unified communications platforms, and how they're being utilised in the streaming world, really. So how the areas are joining together, where an internal UC platform can talk to a far larger audience. That's really the main trend and topics for today. But what I'll do, I'll have the guys introduce themselves. So from your left to right, Paul, if you'd like to just for 60 seconds or so about yourself. Paul McKenzie.
Yeah, hi. My name's Paul McKenzie. I'm from a company called Vega. Vega is an international global company that is involved in delivery of Cisco systems. So it's infrastructure, cloud-based services, and traditional audio-visual integration. So we basically take meeting rooms and integrate our services into that. And that's pretty much what we do.
Thank you, Paul. Paul Merry. I'm from Dell. I sit within the professional services part of Dell, and I have a team focused on delivering unified communication solutions for our customers. My history is in that area over the last 6 or 7 years. We focus pretty much exclusively on the Microsoft platform and generally focus on the more complex deployments, including enterprise telephony, in this context, video conferencing as well.
My name's Bob Young. I manage the video conferencing and webcasting infrastructure for the IFRS Foundation. The actual company sets standards for accountants globally. Webcasting, video conferencing, and the connection to different systems is quite important to what we do. We're a not-for-profit organisation, so it's very important that we are public in what we do. And that's it.
Okay, so what we can do, I'm going to cover 4 main topics, really for about 10 minutes each, and then we can do Q&A. But if anyone's got any burning questions, please do just stick your hand up and shout out. Is there a roving mic? We don't need that. We're not doing roving mics for record. No, fine. It's on camera. Okay, so yeah, just stick your hand up, guys, and shout out if you have got any burning questions. So the first thing I'd like to put to the panel really is, like I say, with UC infrastructure growing on a daily basis, and we're seeing, I think, lots of tech refreshes going on, certainly in our client base. You know, the likes of Jabber, Link, etc., being deployed in lots of corporate organisations. I'd like to say, look at those in terms of how else they're being used. So, you know, are they being used for mass communication? And really how someone's outside of their infrastructure, how someone can be brought in to it. So, Paul, do you want to kick that off, Paul McKenzie?
Yeah, so one of the things that we've found quite interesting is we've got a number of clients that communicate now over the web, and they're using collaborative tools. What they're also trying to do now is they're trying to have a collaborative session from external connections, connect into the main conference, if you like, and record that. So the platforms have really sort of changed now, where people are getting a lot more, there's a requirement for interop. And that's a real big thing at the moment. So things like WebRTC is becoming a very, very big, important part of our business. Being able to take in a Link environment, take that into like a Cisco bridge, if you like, and being able to connect all those people externally and internally on a video call, and incorporating the audio as well.
So, in fact, Paul, on that, so when you say video call, I mean, we're talking people in a traditional VC or telepresence kind of endpoint?
Yeah, so traditionally what a lot of people do is they go into a standards-based video meeting room. That video meeting room will then connect into a cloud-based service, whether that's hosted or on-prem or off-prem, and that's another big sort of question of the day. But what they're also looking at is they're looking at being able to bring in some of their external people that are maybe working from home, or remote workers, or nomadic workers, and they're coming in on things like iPads, iPhones, smartphone technology. They're using means like Skype as well. So that's another important thing that people have been doing, is being able to bond all those different ways of coming into that video call, if you like, in a virtual environment, but being able to share the tools. So application sharing, maybe looking at Excel spreadsheet, annotating over the top of that, and then saving that down. So that's another important thing. It's not just about the video, the audio, it's also about the data collaboration.
So a mixture of internal and external. So,
Absolutely.
Paul Mary, so, when you're, and Paul consults for clients as part of Dell for solutions. So, Paul, when you're consulting your clients, typically is it people want it all locked down internal, or they want to bring in external guests into the meetings? How do you find the marketplace?
It's got to be external. I focus as much on the technology, but equally on how the organisation can do whatever it is they do as an organisation better, having implemented the technology. And whilst there are still discussions over the security of this and the compliance of that, etc., the recognition is absolutely consistent that it's equally available, internal, external, a total blurring of technologies. And I think an observation I would see is that there's a blurring of so many things in UC, and that could be from how business users versus consumers wish to use the technology, approach the technology, the scenarios, and they're all changing at a very rapid pace, something that is very difficult to adapt to.
So, Bob, can you cover off for us how you utilise the technology and what you're webcasting from standards-based kit? So, why is that? Who's the audience? And
Well, because we're public-facing, the way that we actually broadcast, we have to use room-based systems for the several meeting rooms that we have. But we integrate that with obviously software, internet software, webcasting. It's important that our audience are, can see exactly what we're broadcasting. When they're discussing standards, it has to be secure, it has to be reliable.
and so that's, I know the answer, but so live and on demand, that's...
It's very much so. We have to obviously record everything that we do, so video on demand is quite important, particularly for after the event and obviously during the event, and connectivity to via, for mobile devices, etc. That's quite important in terms of viewing.
And it's just one room broadcasting out, or you're
It's one room broadcasting out, where we do bring in additional parties, within the room system. So it could be multi presenters, i.e. showing via PowerPoint, or we can do it via, bring in a desktop and do presentations from a desktop, etc.
Okay. Yeah, we'll come on to that in a part about traditional systems. So we move on to my second point, really, about how these platforms are being used for larger communication. So let's imagine we're here on a link-based call, shall we say, and we then want to get that out to a larger part of the organisation. Paul Mary, are you seeing that when people say, look, great, we're the presenters, but we want to reach far bigger than our link platform perhaps can get to, i.e. 50,000 users in a corporate, for example, with, say, 10 presenters? are you seeing those use cases?
We are, yes, very much. I think there's an underlying theme here, which is a trend I'm seeing, which is there is almost an accidental convergence in some areas. My field is, as I described, principally around a corporate unified communications environment. Even coming to this event today, it struck me as to actually how close some of the discussions and the technologies are, but actually some very different organisations working in a very similar field. And the same is true for broadcasting at large scale, because what I'm seeing is that perhaps in an organisation you have a traditional group of people who would webcast out, who would be highly trained, very specialist in broadcasting to a large audience. And actually, on the UC platform, you've got a very different group of people who are now starting to broadcast to an increasingly large audience. But there's still a slight separation between those two historic teams. Now, the technical challenge that I observe there is when my team's designing a platform, we've got to not try and make the UC platform do something if the broadcast platform is more traditionally better for it, better scaled, more appropriate, etc. So absolutely seeing that blurring, but I'm not sure everyone is really consciously aware that they are sort of overlapping between the two areas.
Right, but do you use one platform to feed another, for example? I mean, do you use, for example, your link to then plug that to a webcasting and broadcast that out? I mean,
Very niche, very unusual for the requirement to come up. What I would observe more often is the case is that you will get overlap in that there's a period in the middle where the two technologies are being used to do the same kind of thing.
Right.
And of course there's a risk there for whoever the consumer of the content is or the organisation.
And so on that, Paul Mackenzie, so in terms of content, I think you talked about just now in terms of slides or maybe a screen share. I mean, are you seeing that people want to interact with that audience? Is it just
Absolutely.
Q&A? I mean,
Well, it's a whole mixture now. So what we're finding is interesting, Paul saying about, you know, the sort of like the link platform and people then sort of moving and sort of saying, well, hold on a minute, we're now reaching out to a bigger audience. Where is the sort of like the cut-off for the communications team to get involved in that, or the marketing team to get involved in that and push it across the traditional methods, or is it going to be the IT teams? But what I've actually seen is it's lots of social media going on where clients are using that social media technology and they're actually saying, actually, I'm going to take control of this and I'm going to push out and I'm going to get involved in it and I'm going to do it. And because they can do it and because they can actually do the collaboration tools as well, they are saying, hold on, I can share an Excel spreadsheet, I can do a PowerPoint presentation, I can push all this media out to people, and they're becoming sort of like kings of their own content. And that's a management thing now, which is...
But you're seeing all your clients wanting to do self-managed?
Absolutely. So there's self-management, and also it's now the businesses are trying to take back control sometimes to say, hold on a minute, guys, we can't just have everybody just becoming their own broadcasters.
And that's what we're actually finding with when we do presentations, PowerPoints, etc., and telling people about new standards coming out, what it means, what changes are going to be made, and then we do that via Q&A, so that we actually do a presentation, and then we have a period of Q&A at the end of it, so people can, you know, get involved with the presentation, and that involves, you know, that's good audience participation as well, and you get a lot of feedback from that as well.
And presumably on your events, Bob, you know who people are. They're not anonymous. They are either members or...
Well, they're members or the people within the industry. I mean, it's any account, you know, any accountants can, you know, register and listen and see what standards are coming out, and they're all published on a website previously. So people register, and they, from any device that they want, they can actually come in, you know, send questions in.
And do you use those analytics of who has asked questions to send specific information to certain people?
Well, we do, because the amount of people that register, it's nice to know where the questions are coming from, who they're coming from, what part of the globe they're coming from, because we're obviously a global standard setter. So it's very interesting to find out what, you know, where the questions are coming from, and, you know, who's got an issue with a different standard, whether it's, you know, country-based or whether it's just company-based.
I mean, around this, what about security? I mean, you know, I think, Bob, in your instance, it's kind of public, by the sounds of it, I think. But I'm assuming, you know, with the two Pauls, your client base, it's locked down. So, I mean, how are you controlling, like you say, you know, people not wanting to say, yes, you can broadcast anything you like to anybody you like. So, how's that being controlled? I mean, is that controlled by being inside the UC infrastructure, perhaps, but when you're going external as well? I mean, how's that access control? I mean,
well, our access, because we have a completely separate video conferencing webcasting infrastructure, so it's set outside of the internal network, so that for the company itself, security is not too much of a problem because we don't really utilise firewalls, etc. We do have Gatekeeper, but that's as far as that goes. The big problem we have is actually communicating with the larger corporates who do have firewalls, who do have links, who do have, you know, all these other systems. So, you know,
in terms of linking to other third parties.
Correct. Yeah. So it's very.
Yeah. So I was talking about the viewers there for a sec. So, you know, Paul Mackenzie, I mean, your client base, I don't know whoever, but presumably they don't want anybody to come and see this information that they're broadcasting out in this social kind of world we're in now.
Absolutely. So we've got a couple of very financially aware clients that don't want information leaking out for various reasons. So they try to contain everything in their own world. And one of their challenges has been is that the infrastructure that they've been using has got external links to it. So it's working out which teams are involved in it. So we tend to find that there's a lot of security, IT people involved who sort of like lock down the networks, but that then has another adverse effect of how do we now get those people that are external to the network to come in because they're important participants. So what we're finding is that our world of, which is literally it's traditional AV meeting rooms which then need to reach out, are being managed and controlled by IT teams. So we're moving away from talking to the facilities guys or the telco guys and now talking to the IT teams and saying, look, we've got to find a way of bridging this, but we need it secure. Where would you like the content to be landed? And that's really where it comes back to streaming, and streaming sort of seems to be the sort of like the answer, as long as you've got the two-way interaction, which I think Bob was alluding to, with people being able to have, a conversation back on the end of the piece.
Yeah.
And in terms of, I think Paul Merry, you said during the break that I think 25% of events are looked at afterwards or expected to be reused in terms of on-demand content.
Yes, so again, I think my observations, I'm coming from a slightly different starting point. Those conversations, those conferences that are broadcast via the UC platform, whatever is being added to that, be it content, be it video, audio, of course, it's mainly being added for the convenience of that conversation at that point in time. And I think it's very important that we allow the people in that meeting to decide what is most valuable. But it's the minority of content in my typical deployments that's actually expected to be retained or is retained afterwards. I think there's a clear contrast there. And I'd observe actually there's probably some benefit that the use of UC could gain from perhaps the metadata and the indexing of that content.
And so typically people want it perhaps retained, but there's not an ability to do that depending on what platform they've got in there, which is like they only see the value in the live.
I think it would open up a wider challenge. I don't know about others, but I still see caution to people using, for example, video as a commonplace part of UC. It varies from organisation to organisation. Sometimes you get a corporate trend which determines that there's more or less use. And I'm seeing it gradually increasing, but I think if we were to start sort of moving more down the route of content creation and retaining content, then perhaps that flexibility might suffer a little.
So Paul, I'll stick with you if I may for a minute. You talked around scalability, the UC streaming, what's the best part of it? So for you, from your experience, I mean, if there's a typical unified communication live event, how many people does that involve? And how many people are actually presenters rather than, okay, they just have to be watching using the UC? I mean, is there a typical number that you're seeing? Let's say, one of end viewers by UC and two presenters, if you like, who are actually actively presenting.
So the consistent there is that when we're designing the solutions, the numbers that are requested are always higher than the actuals, but that's probably just part of technology. So on some of the larger deployments, we've done some profiling, and we have some customers who have very large quantities of conferences. Some of them audio, video, visual, some of them just audio. And over all of those, we find that the average number of attendees is still 3 to 10.
Oh, really? That's what?
Absolutely. Now, this is from a customer who claims that they have sort of very significant meeting needs, and in fairness, in those, there is a peak demand of about 750 attendees. So it's there, but it's an absolute minority part. Now, if you boil that down further, it's 2 to 3 presenters. It's usually more than one, but it's less than 5 or so in those typical scenarios. But it is interesting that the median is always lots of small, focused conversations with a UC solution, with the exception of those 1 or 2 very large events.
So they're more collaborative meetings, large events, but for some reason there's no reason why that collaborative meeting couldn't become a large event.
Absolutely not, no. And if anything, the only design
critique we have to offer our customers is it really worth designing for those 1 or 2 meetings at that very large scale, holding all the capacity there for those meetings, or is that actually where it's more prudent to use an external organisation and combine the two?
So for ad hoc. So Paul McKessie, come to you. I mean, I've known you a long time in terms of selling me lots of things over the years and various people. So what's your view, and I'll come to all of you, but what's your view on the traditional endpoint, the VC endpoint, Polycom, or Sandbox, Cisco, whatever else? Is that dying a death? Everyone's talking around it. Is it really? I mean,
it's turned on its head, because what's actually happened is that the drivers for my particular business and how we're set up is we used to put a lot of hardware, codecs and cameras into a room. Now we're not. We put have you got a PC? Well, the PC can actually be your codec. Just have a webcam. It's good enough because it's HD. And what people are doing is they're doing things like GoToMeeting, Link. They're using all these collaborative tools, but they still want to have a meeting room set up so several people can sit in the room, be heard clearly. So we're adapting things to make sure that the audio is good, got good speakers, good microphones, good pickup, and then having big presentation screens to work on so people can see the content clearly, but they can also see the participants. So sometimes people will drop out the camera because they're not actually interested in the camera feed and seeing the people, they're actually interested in the content. And again, it goes back to my thing about, people having a look at maybe an Excel spreadsheet and working on, active content. And then you get other people, maybe senior executives joining from a boardroom or a meeting room that's got traditional codec in it. Now, the problem's been in the past is that you couldn't mix the two together. So those sessions would happen in one phase, and then you'd move on to like a board meeting that would be an executive team. Now people are saying, actually, we need to flatline this. We need to make decisions faster. So if I can get the board, and there's only a couple of people on the board that I want to talk to, but I can get them to join my session, and it's only going to take 10 minutes, that's what they're trying to do. So we're using cloud technology and streaming to do.
But what you're saying there, that the senior guys are still joining by traditional boardroom-based systems, perhaps, standards-based.
Absolutely.
The guys in a smaller meeting room or the desktop, okay, like they're on their webcams. But
absolutely that. And the key thing is about making it, prevalent and available to everybody. That's the difference. So what's happened in a lot of projects is we've actually taken the codecs and cameras out. We said you don't need so many. You actually need to dumb this down a little bit, because what we need to do is put the capacity into infrastructure, whether you're going to have it cloud, whether you're going to have it hosted, and partnering is a really big thing. It's with these guys here, there's still some of the traditional things that you need to do, but also it's about you can't own all the global network, you can't run all the global network, but what you can do is run a portion of it, and then team up with somebody else who's got the other portion. So we're very big out in APAC, but we're not so big out in the UK, but we've got a number of partners that help us out. So we realise that business is no longer about doing it all by yourself. It's you need a lot of other people to get involved.
But is it about, not everyone's going to say, right, let's throw out this, whatever, telepresence that I paid Cisco X for, a few years ago. It's about reusing that smartly, because you've spent a lot of money on this, so how can we want to use it? Presumably that's, as well as it being perhaps hands-off, I'm guessing for the senior execs in the boardroom, maybe it's a technician at the back or whatever else on a screen. So
one of the big things that's happened for us recently is a couple of clients have actually gone, do you know what, we've got this really expensive codec and camera system, but it's high definition, but everything is in the room, all the acoustics, all the lighting is right. So you're using it as a jump room to create content. So what they're doing is they're going into that room, they're using the codec and camera, not for a sort of like a sort of connection to another codec, if you like. They're actually using it as a recording studio. So we've found the usage has actually changed. They still use it, and it's getting value back. And we're saying, you now need to think about how do you depreciate this and how do you scale your video platform, because the money's actually got to go into the network.
So what you're saying is that perhaps standards-based systems that were kind of gathering dust and not particularly being used are now, they've got another life come back into them.
Yeah.
Okay. But people aren't, in your view, apart from high-end systems, kind of rushing out and buying standards-based systems anymore.
No. So there's probably, if I talk about it in, say, monetary terms, the sort of like the sub £5,000 system, we're seeing a lot more sales of. Anything that is used to be what we call like the £50,000 plus system, sort of like the executive directors or CEO system, we're seeing less of those. But what we're doing is that we're finding that people are reutilising the old kit, if you like, but they're trying to connect into new infrastructure, and that's the key for us, is how do we do that?
So it's one for you, Bob, actually. Obviously, having seen your setup, was that equipment originally put in to do point-to-point or multi-point calls, and it just happens to grab another life for webcasting as well, or was it put in with the view of doing webcasting?
Right, it was actually put in before my time, but it was put in just to start with for point-to-point.
Right.
But also to be able to record, the events or what was being discussed, because it has to be recorded, and that's what it was put in for. So we had to use a third party for all the recording and the webcasting, and it's something that I don't think you can actually use, say, for a web, or web camera or anything else like that, because the amount of people that you actually have on video is quite huge. You're talking about 30 people around a table, plus you've got observers, etc., within the room. So I can't see room systems disappearing.
Okay, that's great. And again, if I stay with you, Bob, for example, one of your board meetings, you want to bring someone in who isn't in a standards-based room. How do you do that at the moment, or do you do that at the moment?
We don't do, if they're not in a standards-based location, then we can't do that. But it's something that we're looking at, which is where WebRTC is going to come into it. Yeah, so we'll be able to use. Yeah. Okay. So I don't want to jump ahead of you.
Point. And just on there, so at the moment you self-bridged out, or is that through a legacy bridge?
We actually had a hardware bridge. We used another company for all our bridging. Up until about a year ago, but since we've taken on a new system, we don't use as much bridging, and now we're looking at probably a software bridge rather than a hardware bridge.
Become self-service, in effect.
Yeah, we need to be self-service. We need to manage what we're doing, and the less third parties that you have, the much easier it is to control.
So, Paul, Mary, have any thoughts on that in terms of the life back in the old standards-based rooms, or what's your view? If you specify a system now, do people still want a standards-based high-end boardroom, perhaps with say standards-based kit, telephones, whatever?
I think that there's a certain pent-up demand there, because what people want is the quality and the consistency of a standards-based room, but with the convenience and flexibility of UC. And if anything, the UC market has been a little slow to adapt to that. A trend that's emerged with UC is that the technology has to flatter and mask over any little indiscretions that the user may put on, whether that be poor lighting, poor audio, poor connection. And then the technology just has to deal with it, because it's part and parcel. Now that's one thing when it's a single user home working, but when those same trends or use models tend to move into the boardroom, I think that gives a sort of an unnecessary distortion of sort of how good UC potentially can be. So if anything, it's that UC, we'd like more accessible, very high quality, very high end cameras, the stuff that comes with a room-based system, right. The consistency, the setup, the lighting, etc., rather than the stuff that goes behind a room-based system.
I think that's also, for our industry, it's really important that people set their rooms up properly, because by setting your room up properly, your investment is actually less in some of the technology that you're using. So poor microphones, if you don't have sort of like digital audio processing, which can take out some echo or some delays and horrible little screeches and squelchy noises that you get in the conference call. And also it stops people getting, doing just typical things, getting a mobile phone out and putting it on the tabletop, or, having 3 calls, from 3 separate devices running in the same room.
Or pouring water into a glass.
So we're always trying to make it easy for people to go and use those rooms, regardless of what technology you're using. But that takes it's an education process that we have to go through with the client. So it's quite difficult to get to the right teams of people, because as I've said before, it's now sometimes in the IT domain, but the facilities people have got the physical room budget, and they're saying, well, hold on a minute, we haven't been told about this. So I think it's just meeting of minds really, isn't it? To get people to understand you can't just jump into a room and have a conference if you've not got the right setup.
So no sales pitches. I mean, what's the reality of of bridging someone in who isn't on a standards-based system, isn't as part of a unified communications platform? What's the reality check of that, of bringing someone into that meeting, which you just did a meeting or make them a broadcast it out? I mean, what's the reality check of that? Not, without saying, yeah, great, we can sell them X, Y, and Z. What's the challenges that we're facing? I mean, Bob, you said that at the moment people do have to go to standards-based room.
Yeah.
Why do this? Because
That's the biggest challenge that we've got, because we got quite a few board members that live quite away from somewhere where they can go to a standards-based system. So they want to be able to use their own home webcam or whatever they've got at home to join these meetings. One, because we're talking about global companies where the time differences are quite a major point. So getting to a standards-based system at 4 o'clock in the morning probably doesn't help them very much. So if we can open that up, i.e. using WebRTC, where they can do something from home, and you can still use a standards-based system, a room system, to dial out to a WebRTC sort of cloud room, if you like, a virtual room, so that we could all communicate.
But at the moment the challenges are that there's not really a standardised platform to do that on.
No, there's not. No.
I think I'd agree in that one of the challenges is we've got too many options. There are, if you take that in the best case scenario, you have to have a procurement process that looks at some similar but very different items. In a worst case scenario, you end up with a customer who has implemented multiple versions of these, and then you get the horrible scenario of which MCU is it on, which virtual meeting room is it in, which external definitive interface is it coming through, and then the challenge there is that consolidation needs to occur.
Yeah, I'll give you a really example. So the company I work for, we're very, very strong out in APAC. We've got a head office out in Hong Kong, but one of the guys I deal with, a guy called Charlie, lives out in Japan. So to get hold of Charlie, because of the time difference and everything, I tend to use Skype. Okay, so I'll use Skype to find him, and it will probably be on. So I've got great, I'll then message him, and then I might go into a quick call. I might then say, have you got is a room free? He'll then walk into a room, and then we'll launch a call, maybe on what we call a Jabber platform, which is like a proper enterprise software collaborative tool, or he'll actually just do like a standards-based video call. We then might actually link up with some other people, and I use the word link, but I use Microsoft Link. So on my iPhone, I've got Link. So if I need to bring in one of my technical colleagues, I will probably do a quick message on Link to bring them in. So it's all about using lots of different ways to find people, locate them, and then to find the best means and best solution to actually go and talk to them.
But we're in a corporate,
we've
gone down the Link route, Jabber route, whatever route.
Yeah.
We haven't got, I can just call someone on Skype. That's not going to happen in the corporate space. As much as you can do that, obviously your clients are on that.
Exactly.
So, like I say, I think Paul was right. Too much choice perhaps out there, and it seems to me that there's a bit of go left or right or black and white. Okay, here's the benefits or not. Or
And it's
right
who's guiding that. That's the key here. Is it's all very well for us guys up here where I've got my platform and hosted services and tin and lots of ways of doing it. But what about for you guys? How do you manage your users? How do you manage sort of like making those connections? What's going to be the best way? Is it going to be Microsoft? Is it going to be Cisco? Is it going to be a UC platform from a Mitel or another telecoms operator? None of us really know the answers, and we're really looking for customers to guide us.
So the interoperability between all
Absolutely,
of those elements,
yeah.
so from webcam, VCs, SIP-based,
Yeah.
which I think brings us neatly on to my fourth and final point for the questions of WebRTC. WebRTC, for those of you, I'm sure you know, is certainly out there, very exciting space with browser-based technology. WebRTC, Bob, you mentioned WebRTC a number of times. I know you're dying to talk about it. So, what can WebRTC do for you in your environment, do you think?
In our environment, it can actually open up remote to remote users, people with different infrastructures, by simply using a browser. You're not downloading any apps to use your browser. It's just simply one IP address, dial that IP address through your browser, connect to a virtual meeting room, and off you go.
But you want to integrate that with your standards
But we need,
stuff,
but
so then
that's
you bring
what we're
that-
looking at now. We need to bring that into the standards-based system and be able to webcast that as well.
I'm getting the feeling that perhaps some of your file presenters aren't necessarily technicians or techies. You know, they're pretty senior board members, so they need a very simple interface just to click and go, presumably.
Yeah, I mean, literally, they just want something simple, something they can just, you know, just set up a shortcut, even if they have to, just to connect to the room. And because they're all over the place, it's not just, you know, it's not just the UK. They're in the States. They'll be in Tokyo. So something that's simple for them to use.
I suppose you've got to cover all
perfect.
languages as well, haven't you? So
Well, yeah, you do, but I mean, most of the board members speak English, which is helpful. So it's.
So Paul Murray, I mean, how do you see, you know, as we go to Dell example, but you know, WebRTC, what does it mean to you, what they can bring to, you know, to this story, if you like?
Yeah, I suppose to a certain extent we have a sort of self-selecting criteria in our customer base, because we're not seeing a massive demand for WebRTC. Now, I mentioned self-selecting, you know, predominantly I'm talking to people about Microsoft-based solutions. All of the vendors out there have got their solutions to a relatively modest plugin. I agree, it would still be nice to get rid of that plugin, but actually with fast connections wherever you are, a modest plugin doesn't seem to be bothering people that much. What I do think on WebRTC is that as an industry, everyone involved, we're not going to be happy when we get to WebRTC. We're talking here about browser-based use. I'm actually seeing more of a trend of people using whatever native application it is on whatever device to connect, in preference to the browser. So we're almost already starting to go past the browser point. For example, that doesn't just mean the whatever client on my tablet, but that could mean the client built into my smart television, the client built into my Xbox, the client built into whatever the AV setup in the hotel room I'm checking into, or something such as that is. So we'll get to WebRTC and then we'll actually move past that and want more. We won't be satisfied.
So coming from anything anywhere, in fact. So Paul McKenzie, so you know, you talk about, yeah, I can pull a Skype call up, etc., but obviously within the corporate space and certainly our joint client spaces, not quite so easy to do that. I mean, so WebRTC within a bank example, you know, in Canary Wharf, for example. I mean, where do you think that's going to be? Is it where the challenges are in that? In that?
So it all comes back to, you know, the security and compliance guys. So I think some of the major concerns have been, you know, is this being recorded? Where is it going? Where's this actually going to sit? But what I'm also seeing is, you know, an acceptance of WebRTC, because they see it as a browser-based solution. They've got to bring your own device policy. Because of that, if you're cruising on the internet, that's absolutely fine. So if you can make a call from that, they're actually okay with that. As long as, yeah, that's starting to move in that way, yeah.
Interesting, okay. So, I mean, just to summarise where we've got to so far, I mean, what I'm hearing here is that UC platforms are being used to connect to other things, be it a webcast, be it to bring in other presenters, that it's being used perhaps just for recording events, whether it's a live and then recorded, or whether it's just done for recording all in your instances. We're seeing that some of the higher end standards-based systems are being used, not necessarily being deployed perhaps, but when we're high end situations, but are being dusted off and being got a new life, because you know whatever the write-off time of those are, it's five or so years from a tech refresh, being reused, and say WebRTC is kind of wait and see, but people still want, where it is being blocked, a fall back to be able to still connect and be part of a meeting that 9 people in WebRTC, one isn't, I don't want to be left out, how that's going to work. So, any questions coming from the room at all in terms of, you know, where we're seeing these trends or your own experiences perhaps with clients? Anyone got any points you want to make?
I have a question.
We don't mind.
I have a question. You talked about webcasting. And in our company, we use webcasts regularly a few times a year when somewhere from higher management has a presentation for its 600, 700, 800 workers, which explains the future of the company or the trends, and then we do a Q&A. And currently, it's done as a webcast on the intranet. So it's just streaming, and we have a small web form where the people can ask questions, which he then will answer if he likes or not. Do you think it's a good idea to replace this or put it into the UC solution in the company? Because we use Microsoft Link. But I mean, the chat is there, and maybe it would be a good idea to, if my colleagues sit on their table and maybe put a small video picture in there and ask the question themselves or so. Do you think that's a good idea, or?
So you're talking, just the presenters being in that space, or everybody, if you like, being in that space?
No, just the presenter is
Right.
in a small studio and tells its stuff, and the other people are just watching on their computer in the office for this half an hour, see what he has to tell, and then they can type questions into the web page.
It's very similar to the question I was going to ask, but there's a specific case scenario. I'd ask the panel where they see the dividing line between what is UC and what is broadcast. So I know Paul touched upon it, but I think here's exactly the case scenarios. When do you make a decision to do whatever it is, a webcast, as opposed to a large communication via a link or a Jabber? And when do you make that choice? Because it is hard to make, and what technical trends or stuff that's coming forward is going to influence that needle one way or the other.
So one of the things I've seen, one of my clients is a large insurance company. They implemented Link. There's about 10,000 users of Link. They're not everybody knew about it and was told or indoctrinated in any way to use it. But they found some interesting stats. One of the interesting stats was just within, sort of like 24 hours of switching it on, there's about 500 users using it for video and stuff like that. Now, one of the things that actually happened is that they wanted to use Link for their conferences and for their town halls between a couple of locations. And the reason they wanted to do that is that they found it was a good way of being able to include everybody, because it was an inclusive platform, it was under their control, they knew who would be looking at it, and they can also collect stats on that. That was quite important to them. So yes, people will use that platform, but the governance of it is questionable, because what's actually happening is that was done by the IT team, but the communications team was unaware. So the communications team was then saying, well, hold on a minute, we now need to get involved in this. So there's a bit of a wrestle going on at the moment where it's people using the platforms are creating, if you like, the problem. And the problem is then being pushed up to the senior management or the teams that then need to discuss it and then become like the gatekeepers. And, that's where I'm sort of saying our issue is, and I'll probably look at Paul on the Dell side, is where do we go with this? How do we, as a supplier of meeting rooms is traditionally what we do. How do we get involved and how do we influence it? Because a lot of people say, well, you just do meeting rooms. Why are you getting involved in collaborative platforms? And the real question for us is, what is UC? We have a big discussion at work about this between all the global regional offices. What is UC? For some of my colleagues, it's a telephone system. For some of my other colleagues, it's a collaborative networking thing. And for some other people, it's something that sits out in the cloud. So we don't even know ourselves what UC is. So it's quite hard to then give an answer to you guys and say, this is where it's going.
Yeah, I mean, the trends that we see, and certainly the talk point, it wants to do a bit of everything. So yes, maybe do have presenters on UC and there, let's call it Link or Java or whatever else, and then do want to maybe meld that in with traditional based rooms that maybe, or auditoriums, those kinds of stuff. I think it's a bit of everything. And so what the kind of inquiries we're now getting certainly is about people wanting to use those collaborative tools, but then go out to a larger audience. That's certainly trends we're seeing at Talk Point. So, Paul Merritt, have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think two areas really. There's the technology side of it, and then there's the usage side of it. On the technology side of it, I suppose, and incidentally, I think that's the easier to cover. I would suggest that you've got to be doing that if you've properly sized and you're comfortable that that platform has been used at that scale. It sounds obvious, but you don't want to be doing that town hall as the first meeting of that size. And so if you've put in the platform and you've sized it for that, absolutely use it for that purpose. But you'll get to a point whereby if your organisation is, say, 1,000 people or whatever, then it's probably a very sensible threshold. If your organisation is 50,000, then naturally you're going to start facing other capacity things, which mean that it's probably not the most appropriate technology. And be that dialing capacity, broadcast capacity or something. On the non-technical side, an area that is very interesting to me is I think you have to make sure that the people using that UC platform are going to use as high a quality equipment and setups as they would if they were using a more traditional way of broadcasting that. My observation would be external organisations are often brought in to help with that town hall meeting if you're using a one-off event. If you're using UC, there's more of a temptation to do it yourself with what you've got. And that's where my concern comes in using that. So I think technology is absolutely there, and not just the platform we work with, many of the platforms, but it's almost not allowed to flourish because of the equipment.
So I'll come back to you if I may. So the events you do, I think you said 1 or 2 a year, you've got a solution internally that does that, or do you bring someone in and it's they just do it for you?
We have the solution internally. We have quite a large streamer platform for external customers.
Okay.
And since the technology is there, a few years ago we just put a smaller version on the internet, which has also good load balancing over the whole country. So it started just as we have it, so why don't we use it?
Right.
And we also have a small team that knows how to operate cameras, how to do the audio, how to set up the light. So we create a small studio.
But
it's done in-house, but it's a professional audio-video guy.
Yeah. But literally only a couple of times a year, although you've got the infrastructure to do it, you're only using a couple of times a year.
Yeah, we have the infrastructure. We also do webcasts and live streamings for external customers. So we already have the stuff and can use it internally.
But sorry, I'm interested. Why don't you do more internally? Because we don't need to talk more internally. Is it okay? Sorry, it's only the CEO who can use this tool. I mean, is there a barrier that stops more of internal webcasting going on, or is it just it's not required kind of thing?
The barrier is who thinks basically who wants to do it. So only the requests only came from the CEO and from top level management, because all the others didn't have the need to talk to their employees. So
many years ago I started off at that level, and then suddenly word got out.
Yeah.
So
if I could just ask a question on that, is the desire to use something like Link to broadcast that because it's felt as live, you're hearing it absolutely at the moment when it's being said, and even that subtle difference between is it to get a live experience? Is that one of the motivators?
In fact, so on that, because I'm thinking, if you did use the UC platform, does that mean you were talking about you've got, sounds like some great in-house professional services? Okay, are we now happy with someone sat in front of a webcam instead of the CEO? Or hang on, we still want to plug in a professional studio into that environment. So would you be, if you did go down more of a UC route, would you be happy that, or the company culture, do you think, would be happy that it's now webcam rather than it's now a nicely lit studio?
If we want to incorporate it in our UC solution, I guess we wouldn't do it in the conference room. We would still keep the studio with professional cameras and just put the video signal in there. But the rest of the infrastructure I think it would be a good idea, because Link is installed on every computer, and there you have more possibilities to chat in Link, or the communication between the audience could be more in depth during this presentation.
And scalability for your particular setup, you could do that over a UC platform rather than have to say, okay, look, we've reached the capacity of that. People are watching on streaming, but it sounds like in your instance you could use the UC platform to join and watch as well.
I don't know if
Right,
there are the
okay.
technical capacities. It's just I'm thinking about the ideas to
No, sure.
to change the script.
Yeah, because I'm thinking if you had the presenters on whatever on the UC, you have the CEO in the studio, X, Y, Z on cameras, but then that's still being broadcast out. So,
I think there's an element as I'm trying to think through that divide myself, that because of UC and collaboration and video, people are used to interactivity. Whereas the broadcast have tended to be, well, you sit and listen.
Yeah.
Because your contribution is not there. So there is the nuance of whether it's actually live with a slight delay. I think people are so used to it now that they want to give their feedback.
so more
Yes.
interactivity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good and bad, because firstly you've got to control that interactivity to set up your meeting appropriately, as with any technology. Set up the meeting so that people can't interrupt you, but your speakers have got to be very comfortable with absolute live broadcast. There's no editing, there's no tweaking that.
It's live, yeah.
Sometimes, in my experience, it's actually the speakers who prefer not to do it, because of that very live nature, rather than the audience who would prefer to have it interactive.
Guys, time's ticking on. We've got a few minutes left if there's any more questions, but I'm also aware that you hear the tinkle of the drinks out there as well. So, any more questions we want to address from the audience? Any more points, guys, that you want to come up with?
I just think that it's quite interesting about, this demand thing coming, where a lot of users are now sort of saying we want that interactivity. I think, I always say my customers are a lot more intelligent than they used to be. And, as a salesperson, I have to up my game, up my, platform. But I think it's even more important to be able to give people that delivery mechanism. And now to do that, it's really, we're finding the drives coming from customers. And they're saying, we're using Link, but it's now us educating the client to say, well, hold on a minute, you're going to use that. As you broadcast out from a lovely, wonderful studio, where are you picking it up from? Because that's another important, crucial bit, is where you pick it up and, streaming it out to a very live audience. You want to make sure that that lighting is right and the acoustics is right, so people can ask back questions and be seen clearly.
So in my mind, that's utilising the UC platforms in ways they hadn't thought of.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I guess, well, there's ice creams out there, whether there's cold beer or wine. I'm sure we all want to get that. So thanks so much. Thank my panel, Paul McKenzie, Paul Mary, and Bob Young.